Alright, so in this video, we're going to go over some of my general thoughts on StarCraft 2's current maps and why they need to change drastically for better gameplay for both the players and viewers. And this video won't be perfect, so just hang with me while I go through things, because we're gonna need to draw and stuff, because drawing's cool. So to start things off, I thought I wanted to go over some of the pros of Brood War maps so that we can kind of compare and contrast as we go along. The first thing I wanted to go over is how terrain is very important for army movement and strategical positioning, and this can give a smaller army a great advantage. And this is due to the terrain advantage in Brood War, which allows for units to miss from the low ground. And what this allows for is for planned risks that can pay off in a what I think is viewer-friendly and understandable way, which is not really present in StarCraft 2. So, for example, the first thing I wanted to show is how on this map, Jade, which is one of the Brood War maps, we can see that there is an area between the natural here and the third base. And there is this huge ramp which gives the defender a small but noticeably sort of different defender's advantage. And this makes it so that if the attacker comes up the ramp, they have to go all the way up this ramp to get full damage potential from their units. Even if they have more units on the bottom of the ramp, which generally leads to them overtaking the people on top of the ramp, it allows for the person on the top of the ramp to conceivably have less units and be able to defend the area. So I think this is something that not a lot of things we see present in StarCraft 2. So, like, for example, we'll see when we get to the StarCraft 2 maps how this sort of thing doesn't really exist. But anyway, we can also see how at the third base here, there's a small choke, which is something that we kind of see with StarCraft 2 maps, but when we get there, we'll show how it's different. But this is the same thing. There's a bigger choke on the outside for attackers, so that if they have more units, they can overtake this area. But if there is a similar number of units, the person on the top defending the area can actually still defend the location. So you can do things like take a third base quicker, and if you know when certain timings are going to hit, you can still actually defend these bases and then be at an economical advantage, get more units, and then get a really big advantage in a different phase of the game. So there are clear ways that viewers can see this when units are missing, or when a certain phase of the game comes along and you say, oh, well, this person has a lot more units all of a sudden, and you can see how it pays off in the game. And on La Manca, we can see that the map has similar layout, how at the third base there's this ramp. On the attacking side, if you're attacking, you have bigger choke than the person on this side. But again, if you have more units attacking, you can still brute force your way, but at the same time, coming through a choke means that the defender has an advantage here, and it's very noticeable. Same thing when they attack from this side, or if this person's attacking this way. It allows for more routes for attack, so you can come in this way and come in and attack from here, also attacking from this side if you're the attacker, but also allows for the defender to set out units here and here. So there's a lot of different aspects that can be taken advantage of, or as we'll get to later, positioning really makes a difference in Brood War. Now, Circuit Breaker, on the other hand, actually has the reverse of the two maps that we just saw, and that's because when you're taking a third base on this map, the ramp is actually positioned onto your third base. So instead of having to be the person who might want to take a greedy third base, when you take your third base, you have to be aware of the fact that when someone attacks it, they actually have the advantage. When they attack you, they have the advantage on the high ground. Even if you have more units, like the reverse, so you see here, this side has the bigger choke because you get this much area, as compared to the attacker coming in this way, how they have more area. You still have to be aware that you can miss their units, and if you don't have enough to defend that location, even if you have a faster third base, it might not pay off. And so I think this sort of thing it allows for varied game results between races, and it makes for an exciting change of pace between maps that isn't inherently or fundamentally not fun to play. And we'll see that as we get to the StarCraft 2 maps, a lot of the issues with the maps just make them not. fun to play. So next I wanted to talk about how all aspects of terrain have an importance in Brood War maps, such as ramp width. The middle of the map has more areas to surround or outmaneuver players, and I think Heartbreak Ridge is a really good example of this because there are basically two different ways to go through the map, and you can either go this way. So if you spawn here, you can go this way. If you spawn here, you can go this way. But also you can go through the middle of the map. And what this allows for is if someone's attacking up through this way, you can actually flank their units by coming around. So let's show that. So if someone comes up here, you can actually send your units around and then attack them from two sides. And this sort of thing isn't really present in any StarCraft 2 maps, or at least there's not really a clear advantage or reason to do something like this. Generally, it's just if you have more units, you attack and then you win. So let's see here. Oh yeah, so there's also I also wanted to talk about how there's an interesting mechanic on this map. If you guys actually didn't watch the league that's happening with all of the old pro Brood War players, this mechanic was actually used in the game. There was a game between, I forget who the Zerg player was, but Bisu was playing against him. And you can mine out this back area with workers and then actually bring units up here and behind the natural base. And what this allows for, I think, is pretty interesting. Pretty interesting mechanic that it allows for timing attacks in the game, which seems kind of broken, like how we kind of think of maps in StarCraft 2, how having a mechanic like this is really favorable to one race. However, the timing at which when you would have enough units to do this, there's ways for races to counter it, and again, it's on the ramp. Generally, there's things like pylons there that you can use to spot it and then have enough units to defend it, that kind of a thing, because again, you have a bigger choke than units coming through right here. But the important thing to notice is that after you get past the phase in the game where this mechanic is kind of something that you have to pay attention to, you secure your base at this location. So this mechanic essentially does not exist anymore once you get past a certain phase in the game. And what this allows for is it allows for a cool aspect to be added to a map without, again, fundamentally breaking it or having it unfun to play against. It's just something that you have to be aware of, and as long as you watch it and prepare for it, and it's not something that's like you die to every time. Another cool aspect I wanted to talk about is on Triathlon, and this is a pretty old Brood War map, but I don't know how many people remember this map, but this map actually has cloaked eggs at your, I don't know if you can actually see that, but they have cloaked eggs that block off expansions, and what you could do in Brood War was you could mineral path workers from your main base into this area, and you could essentially take a free base that was completely, I mean, there's no way to get to it from an attacking position. So it allows you to take a hidden expansion that you could saturate over time and eventually get an economic lead if you took it early. But at the same time, it allowed for, there's a lot of players like Fantasy, you know, who would abuse things like this by having your base separated. They would abuse the fact that you can't get units to it early enough. So they would do things like vulture drops and stuff like that. So it adds, again, different mechanics to maps that are not fundamentally, they don't fundamentally break or make the game unfun to play, but it adds something interesting to this map and adds different ways to play the game. So that's pretty much for that. The third thing I wanted to talk about was about the difference in how maps are built in Brood War. And this is something pretty foundational to almost every Brood War map. And I think it creates a really interesting aspect that we don't have in StarCraft 2. And it's that there's a center of attention for viewers. And it's basically how, if you look at almost all of these maps, there's almost always open space in the middle of maps for armies to basically position and jive around, kind of like how I was talking about for army movement and strategical positioning. But you can see how this is really apparent in the terrain itself. So there's ramps here, and also these provide vision blockers. And if you don't have vision, you would get glimpses of the unit in Brood War when it attacked, but vision was much more important. So giving up positioning, as previously mentioned, can result in a loss in its own right. So, for example, if you allow someone, which this was a lot more common in Brood War, but if a Terran sets up hard contained, just for example, if we look at Jade, if you were to get hard contained on 2 base, this is all, you are essentially blocked off to this side of the map. And at that point, the Terran player has access to the whole map. And it's a lot different of a position where in StarCraft 2, it's not necessarily a bad thing to be quarantined off. For example, maybe you build up Immortals and then bust out later, like we'll talk about. It's not necessarily a bad thing to be soft-contained in StarCraft 2, but in Brood War, these setups are simply more effective due to space-controlling units and the economy. So when you get stuck in a position like this, generally speaking, you're not supposed to be caught in a position like this because, as we mentioned earlier, you're supposed to be out on the map, moving around, taking advantage of vision and ramps and things like that so that this sort of thing doesn't happen to you. But if it does, then you have to make sure that you remedy the situation quick, or you are at a clear disadvantage, which is not only noticeable to the viewers, but also as a player, you know you've gotten yourself into a bad situation. So it's just a lot more apparent of what's going on in the game and also where you are at as a player. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about with Brood War maps. And now we're going to move on to the cons of StarCraft 2 maps. And before we actually... I don't know how to do this. Alright. Before we actually get into this, the biggest issue that simply just has to be stated is that gold bases should have been removed in 2010. And somehow I'm confused, but we still have them in 2015. There's no other way to really state it than they're simply imbalanced and not good for competitive gameplay. I don't think any pro player advocates for gold bases. I think every gold-based map that has ever been introduced in recent pro maps has been forcefully done by Blizzard. There's been a few GSL maps that have done it, but I think those are more like the Team League maps back in the day that were just kind of for fun, like the Fruitland map and that kind of thing. They weren't really interesting in any way, and they don't really provide anything exciting to the game. It might be fun as a kind of one-off thing or in a fun tournament like a Team League, but they're really more trouble than they're worth and shouldn't be included in any competitive maps. And I think almost every pro player would probably side with that. But anyway, moving on to some of the things we mentioned earlier, we're going to contrast some of the statements from Brood Wars so that you can see in general how it's not very good to move around on almost any StarCraft 2 map. There's either very few open paths to surround or outflank an enemy, or there's the simple fact that moving out on the map doesn't really provide any strategic advantage. Of course, unless you're Terran, you're obviously wanting to be dropping all the time, but simply controlling the map doesn't really provide any advantage as it does in Brood War. So there's nothing really wrong with just sitting in your base, and we can see there's actually a good example of this on Echo. So on Echo, this was like considered to be the better of the maps from the last season, and it's kind of interesting that we think of this as a better map because as a Protoss player on this map, what your goal is to get this base, and then this base, and then you basically just sit here and power up on 3 base and control this space with observers or whatever else. And then once you get a good enough army, you move out to this area to force field here or here, and you just go out on the map and try and pull apart, say, a Terran player until you can get Storm. And then once you get Storm and Colossus on 3 base, you basically just go over and destroy them because the progression on this map is a lot harder for the Terran player once you get to this phase of the game. And if you look at any of the Pro League matches, I think from just like a month or two ago that were on Echo, if you there was a specific night, I think, where there was multiple Protoss versus Terrans, where this exact same thing happened. They would get Blinkstalkers, Colossus, move to this area of the map with force fields, and then when the Terran finally had enough army, they would attack here. Protoss was force field here, force field here, force field here. Come back, they would have high Templars, and then they would just go attack and win the game. And so it's like a lesser form of posturing where it's not really fun because they just sit here, and then when they come back to their base finally, they just go A move with Colossus and Storm, and it's not very fun or interesting to watch, I don't think. And even as a Protoss player, I think it's not very quote unquote good or nice gameplay to watch. All right, so the next thing I wanted to contrast to Brood War was some of the aspects from the StarCraft 2 map simply having no purpose or not really having a reason for actually being included at all. There are also instances of terrain destroying really any semblance of reasonable progression in the metagame. And great examples of this would be the fact that we just got this Dash and Terminal map. I don't know if you guys have played this map yet, but I don't know what's going on here. This map is like essentially a remake of Scrap Station, and we can kind of see how the base progression is the same. You come down this ramp, take this base, and then there's these rocks in the middle of the map. There's also these gold bases, which I guess just got added instead of the dead space between the bases because I guess why not? I just add some rocks in the middle, that'll make it better. And then you have this island base over here, which is just kind of its own thing, I guess, floating off in the corner. And I mean, if we look at the Scrap Station here, you can see how it's got this base progression where you go down and to the side. The only difference is that this base is up here. We have these rocks again, this dead space in the middle. The only thing is the two gold bases, which is pretty irrelevant because they shouldn't be there in the first place. Then you have this other base up in the top. But the confusing thing about Dash and Terminal, aside from the gold bases, which shouldn't exist, is the fact that you have this back area behind your natural. Now, generally speaking, the effect of this isn't, you don't really see it as much as you would in the Brood War maps. So earlier we were talking about, let's see if we can get this back up. All right. Earlier we were talking about on Heartbreak Ridge how you have this backdoor to your natural, and as you expand out, you kind of create a barrier here by having this base or being out on the map and kind of controlling space with your army. But on Dash and Terminal, the problem with this map is that there's all these open areas for the same amount of army space on both sides of chokes. But the fact that you can come from the south and say use all this dead airspace to drop behind this base or go up and around and drop back here. So generally speaking, simply having this base there's no way to really limit attacks from coming through here. And as we mentioned before, you're not out on the map vying for position against someone else. Your army is generally just sitting here or sitting here or sitting up here. So essentially you just wait for these drops, and the whole point of this is simply for that kind of like gimmicky mechanic where if dropships get through, they can snipe this base really quick or this base really quick, and the game can turn around really quick, and it makes for not fun or really exciting thing to watch as a viewer. You just kind of wait for the medevacs to come in or wait for something like this to happen, which will immediately turn how the game has progressed up to that point. So the final con I wanted to go through is that, as I mentioned in the other maps, there's nothing really foundational that StarCraft maps or StarCraft 2 maps are built around. Space control is incredibly important in Brood War, and thus the armies almost are always dancing around the middle of the map. And this is something really cool. If you guys don't watch Brood War, I definitely recommend you go back and either watch old VODs of it. I mean, there's still new tournaments that are going on nowadays where you can see players moving around the map, getting terrain advantages, controlling with their units, and doing what the units are actually supposed to do. And so I think I don't know if the maps are just supposed to be like, or if the new units are supposed to be a crutch for what kind of maps are in StarCraft, or I mean, if what maps are in Brood War. So we have units like Liberator come out, which are just supposed. They have a mode which is literally just supposed to control airspace, or I mean ground space. So you just like put it next to a base, and you say, okay, well, it can look here and it can look here, so I don't have to worry about this base anymore. There's some games in Legacy of the Void where people have literally just gotten enough Liberators to completely section off a base, and just sitting there, as we mentioned before, is not necessarily a bad thing. So they can just sit in their base behind the Liberators and nothing bad comes from it. So the point is that all of these failures of StarCraft 2 maps, how you don't have really an interesting middle of the map. You have maps like Terraform, where if you're actually going to attack, you just go straight through the middle of the map to either the third base, or you just come up here. If you're coming to attack the third base, you just go down here. You can see there's not really any ways to flank this army. I mean, this is like the only thing, but if we compare it to the Brood War map, there's a lot more avenues for players to go around and get better flanks, get better engagements, more opportunities for you to see players' skill shine through, and it's just not present in current StarCraft 2 maps. Anyway, I think that pretty much sums up everything I wanted to say. I mean, there's not really any room for posturing up here, and I think all of these things together really shed, hopefully, some light for you guys on why StarCraft 2 maps are really bad. And at this point, I really just kind of want to emphasize how much thought actually went into, and still goes into, Brood War maps, given the progression in the metagame over such a long period of time. And so some of you guys might say, oh, well, that's just something that Brood War has and StarCraft 2 doesn't. The game hasn't been out as long. But it seems like what we currently have in StarCraft 2 is a regression in map design. We have things like Moonlight Madness, where you just have these backdoor rocks and rocks and rocks. And we have Dash and Terminal, where we have gold bases and gold bases, and then a floating island. Which floating islands by themselves aren't necessarily a bad thing, but when it's just one floating island and then gold bases, there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason for why those things are in that map. And overall, it doesn't really add anything to it, so why are they there? And it seems like, I don't know, this regression in map design is kind of due to horrendous fan submissions. No offense to some of the Team Liquid map makers, but seriously, like, I kind of mean to offend you with this video. The maps are pretty bad. There's maybe, I mean, there was even there was one of those talk shows with Desro. Is that Metagame or something? I don't even know what it is. I don't watch this stuff. Where Desro, Danny Wall, Huck, they all talked about how terrible most of those maps were. Like, you could even tell. Go back and watch that video. Maybe I'll include a link. If you go back and watch that video, you can tell how not interested Huck and Danny Wall are with the fact that they're talking about those things, because the maps are just not done well. And it's the same thing with the designs handed to us by Blizzard, and they're forcefully given to the pro players. Like, this map season, these maps just came out, and we're having WCS qualifiers played on them immediately thereafter. They've been out for not even a week, and we already have to play on them. They give us that notice if you want to go play custom games with your friend, but that doesn't really fix the fact that the maps themselves are pretty bad. So this sort of thing really has to change for the competitive scene, and it's not really a big surprise why leagues like Kespa still use their own maps, and why they still use maps that are very old at this point. It's just because the new maps that do come out are not really worthy of pro players' times. Anyway, if you guys like the video, make sure to share it. Maybe, but doubtfully, Blizzard will show some support, and maybe things will change, but probably not. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Peace.